This agent told me, first of all, nobody cares about AI, that it won't sell. And that was before the ChatGPT boom. So he was proven wrong. He was very far off. But then he said, if your book made a prediction of the end of the world, then people may want to buy it. That's what people buy. You need to either be highly positive or highly negative. You need to tell us that it's going to change our lives for the better or for the worse.
Welcome back to another episode of El Podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Emmanuel Maggiori, a software engineer with a PhD in machine learning and has been an AI consultant for over a decade. Emmanuel is also the author of the book, Smart Until It's Dumb: Why Artificial Intelligence Keeps Making Epic Mistakes and Why the AI Bubble Will Burst. And yes, that is the full title of the book, which is today's topic on El Podcast. Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So when I was searching for you on YouTube in preparation for this podcast, the main thing that popped up was an article that you wrote, I believe in March, and it's called, I've been employed in tech for years, but I've almost never worked. You wrote in this blog that in many large tech companies, employees engage in minimal, meaningful work due to practices like exaggerating task complexities and focusing on hype-driven projects, leading to an over-allocation of staff resources and task bloating. You mentioned that in this article that in the 5 months of working as a software developer for a distinguished investment bank, you worked only 3 hours total in 5 months. Total. Yes. Can you explain why tech employees are among the highest paid professionals while basically doing nothing?
There's a number of reasons, but first, let's make it clear that it has happened a lot. But it's not just me. I got to this point of landing job after job on projects where there was nothing to do, not even if I tried to do something. And my latest experience in that direction was with this investment bank. It was a bit of a career change. I told myself, I'm going to escape a little bit the AI world because it's, sometimes a bit overhyped. So I will just join finance. I will do traditional software development. So I got this job for this famous investment bank. And for 3 months at first, they didn't even assign me to a project. And I begged for something to do, and they wouldn't even... I was in I don't know what they call it. It was like a staging area or something like that, where I was being paid a good 6-figure salary for absolutely no work. And then in the other 3 months, the work was very, very meaningless. There was a lot of task bloating. So people got together all the time to decide how much effort every task required. We even did a sort of polling or voting on each other's tasks. And everybody decided that my tasks were, this is a 2-week job, but it's rewriting 2 paragraphs. I can do it in 10 minutes. But then everybody agreed, no, it's really big. And then I noticed everyone's doing this. It's all overblown. And if it was the first time this happened to me, it could be an exception, but it's happened a little bit too much. Then I started speaking with people and noticing that a lot of people I know were in the same situation. We had this wave of layoffs in tech, including Twitter, which laid off 80% of its workforce, and it's still running. How can a company run with only 20% of the people that used to work there? It's probably because they weren't doing much. There's an epidemic of idleness in the tech field, and it's making a lot of people unhappy because you're paid a lot, but you enter that profession to actually build something, build a product, have fun, and you end up walking around in circles in your apartment pretending that you work, having meetings where you say what you did, and you kind of have to pretend that it took longer because otherwise it threatens the existence of the whole team if everyone says, I'm really not doing much. And so it was quite an experience because I decided to speak about this, and I wrote this article, and it became insanely viral. We're talking hundreds of people started sending me emails. Some of them needed to vent. They just wanted to tell me their stories. There's a guy who actually quit his job after reading my article. And the story is very similar. And I think there's a few causes. There's been a lot of hype about certain products, AI being one of them. Sometimes management thinks that we just need to create a team for AI. We don't know what we're going to do with AI, but let's just put 70 people in the team That was the case with this investment bank. It was a team with 70 people in it, but we didn't really know what the use case would be. We hadn't spoken with a user of our intended system. Nobody had, right? So you've got 70 people in the team. Nobody knows what to do. What's one of the reasons? Obviously, tech is quite obscure for business people. They don't really understand how it works. So it's very easy to also pretend that things are harder to build than they are. There's also this whole methodology called Scrum that has taken over the tech world, almost like a religion. This is how we become agile. This is how we become an agile organization. And it has a very, very strict recipe to follow. And I think it's having the opposite effect. Every task is divided into micro tasks. Everyone needs to commit and say, this is how long it's going to take to do even the smallest task. So everyone kind of pretends that it's longer because you don't want to be wrong. There's a lot of rituals, like meeting every day in the stand-up meeting. I've heard that even some people have been asked to hold a plank on the floor while they do the meeting. There's a whole infantilization of the tech workforce. And the result is people are just not doing much. Most of my work has been when I've engaged in freelance projects. And that's why now I'm working as a freelancer, because I feel I actually get to work. So yeah, that's the story.
What do you think is the main driver? You kind of mentioned about this in your book where maybe upper management doesn't even know what's going on, but then middle management wants to justify their salary and their role. And it's like, yeah, I'm managing 70 people and all this stuff. And if that team were to go, or if that project were to fail, maybe that middle manager who's probably making like $500,000 a year, some ridiculous salary, would lose their job. Because you're basically saying in your book that you'd be on a project and your only thing you were doing was lying to make the project seem more like it was actually functioning. That way the team would stay employed, but the manager of that team had incentive financially to lie about that project.
Yeah, that's the most cynical take on middle management, to say they just care about the money they make and that's why they keep doing this. And it's true that the middle management is often measured in terms of how many people, or they say the success of a middle manager is measured in terms of how many people they manage. So they want a large team, right? There's also a little bit of a less cynical take, is that they are actually trying to protect. Because what happens a lot with all these blockchain, metaverse, AI projects, you name it, the kind of the buzzword of the day, is that a person higher up, not a middle manager, someone higher up decides use blockchain for something, and they put this middle manager in charge and they give them a budget, and this person hires people. And then after a year, they realize that it's not working and they don't want their team to disappear, right? So we could think of them not just protecting themselves, but the team, to say, okay, we've just hired 20 people to work on blockchain. And then we realize that actually we don't need blockchain for this. So what do I tell this upper manager up there? It was a bad idea. Let's just scrap the whole team. That's not what really happens usually. Yeah.
Combination of a bunch of factors. But yeah, I just thought that article that you wrote was interesting. I'd never worked in tech, but it honestly doesn't surprise me. I've worked in a lot of places where the average person probably works an hour or 2 hours a day, and then they bitch about how underpaid they are. And my response was, if you're so underpaid, then why do you have so much time to bitch about it? Like, I would imagine you'd be so busy you wouldn't have time to complain, but maybe I'm wrong.
Quite an extravagant world, right, tech? You see all these people in bin bags, like going to the yoga class and at work, and I thought it couldn't last too long. I thought something's going on here that's very strange, that's driving this. You asked the question. I think there's also the question of very low interest rates, free money, borrow free money for projects. Also not being able to actually make money from lending your money to others, because that's what happens when you have low interest rates. So you engage in these outlandish projects. Let's shoot for the moon. Let's try to use AI with blockchain and NFTs for something, just in case. Otherwise, we can't really make our money work for us. So I think that's another cause.
Yeah, that's a good point. You saw as the interest rates increased, all of a sudden they laid off a bunch of people at Twitter, and Meta did the same, and Google did the same, and Amazon did the same. They all laid all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, startups too. It wasn't just the big companies. Startups have fired a lot of people. Yeah, It wasn't going to last forever, the beanbag and the beer taps. And
so let's jump into the AI, since that's why I invited you to join us. Emmanuel, since you are the author of the book, Smart Until It's Dumb, Why Artificial Intelligence Keeps Making Epic Mistakes and Why the AI Bubble Will Burst, how does AI differ from machine learning, and why has it become such a hot topic recently?
Most people, when they say AI, they mean machine learning, at least since the 2010s, I would say, which is the kind of methodology that drives AI at the moment. It's machine learning. So I would say they're kind of synonyms. They're not exactly the same. Machine learning would be the methodology used, which means that computers are learning stuff from data instead of us programming every single detail of what a computer should do. That's the innovation, if you want, of machine learning, and that's what AI is at the moment.
In your book, and you mentioned the example of AlphaGo, which Google's subsidiary DeepMind created in 2015, and Henry Kissinger, in his book on AI, where he's fearful of AI, he uses that as an example, the AlphaGo, and that's always the most common example of AlphaGo. But then you, in your book, I thought you did a good job, because your book really made me look at AI quite differently, and I would even tell friends that example because that's what everyone would say. And then an actual PhD, someone that actually works in the AI space, it basically is like, it's not really a good example to use. Can you explain what that example is for people that might not know the AlphaGo, and then explain why it's not really AI, but more machine learning?
AlphaGo was the system that managed to learn from data to create a strategy to play the game Go. And it won against a famous human player, like a world champion. And because the game has so many possible moves, many more than chess or other games, people thought it's maybe 50 years away. And then all of a sudden, this computer learns how to play Go and wins against a human. The biggest misconception about the system was that it learned without human knowledge. And that's how they publicized the system. It was actually called Alpha Zero. They created another iteration of the system called Alpha Zero. And this was a paper published on Nature that said, learning to play Go without human knowledge. I think that's a little bit disingenuous, if you want, because the computer, or if you want, the system, was designed taking into account rules of how games are played, right? So we have this system called the convolutional neural network that has a lot of knowledge embedded from humans in selecting to use this type of technology. And they used that, and then there were simulated games of a computer playing against itself, and the system learned from those games. So if you want, the system learned without seeing real humans playing, just simulated games. But it's not that there was no human knowledge, because all these researchers, they designed the system specifically for Go. So it didn't really learn without human knowledge, and that's how machine learning works nowadays, including ChatGPT. The way it works is that a researcher creates a template of the solution. It's a very, very precise recipe of how to solve the problem. And then there are some blanks that are left in it, usually some numbers that define the details. For example, when we're processing images, the details are, let's say, which kind of filter do I apply to this image? But the researcher decides we will apply, let's say, 30 filters, and then apply another 30 filters. So it's all done thinking about the specific problem you're trying to solve, and then there are a few details that are left as blanks. And that was the case with AlphaGo. It was a system designed for this game playing, and there were specific details, like what should you look for in the board, that were left for the machine. That's how machine learning works. We don't really let the machine learn anything, because then it's a needle in a haystack situation. There's so many actions it could learn that lead nowhere, that it will never find anything useful. And that's why I don't think it can go rogue. The computer will just go out and kill people, because we need to help it learn. Like with ChatGPT. The innovation with ChatGPT was in how we help the computer find ways to disambiguate words, if you want. How can we use the context of the word to find its true meaning? And it was done very precisely. Okay, so the computer can learn, there was an example today from someone on LinkedIn. He mentioned the word Paris, that could refer to Paris in Texas or Paris in France. So how do you disambiguate this word? The creators of ChatGPT invented a way of combining words from the context to try to disambiguate the way you represent a certain word like Paris. So if the word cowboy is nearby, the computer will kind of lean toward Texas, or the word US, or the word Dallas. If it's Eiffel or tower, then it will lean toward France. Instead of doing that by hand, writing every possible rule by hand, cowboy means Texas, they let the computer discover these rules. But the format in which these rules operate, that's designed by the researcher. So that's if you want a more realistic take on how current machine learning works.
From reading your book, it seemed to me that AI would be good for things that, like the game AlphaGo, where you know all the variables and you have a very controlled environment. You talked a lot about self-driving vehicles, and you basically say, they're 99% there, but that 1% is going to be maybe not impossible, but it's decades out, where it's like you have a deer running onto the road, or a child running onto the road, or a super heavy snowstorm comes out of nowhere. There's so many unknown variables that you just can't plan for, right?
Yeah, and there's also this notion of a world model. So when we're driving, and if there's an umbrella that blocks you, you know it's soft. You know what's going to happen if you hit the umbrella. If it's a deer, like you said, it's going to be a different situation. But when you go to driving school, nobody tells you deer, bad, umbrella, good, right? But that's how current AI works. Machine learning learns by scanning examples of how to do the job and fill those blanks in the template. So the challenge for self-driving cars is that there are edge cases that are not in the data that can be quite bad. The umbrella, the deer, there's situations that are not really found in the data. And that's why I've been saying for a while that self-driving cars weren't really possible within the realms of current machine learning. We don't really know how to equip the machine with this comprehensive world model, how the world operates so that computers can really drive themselves, or cars can drive themselves anywhere. So if you restrict the environment to a specific city with a specific layout at a certain specific time of the day, then it could potentially work.
People love buzzwords, and you mentioned there's a lot of times it's not AI. And like the self-driving cars, are they even AI right now? They have cameras and sensors and GPS. Is that really even AI anyways? It doesn't even seem like that. They just use the word, like, oh, it's an AI driving car, where it's really a GPS guided car with sensors, right?
So sometimes they do use machine learning if that's our bar to say this is AI or not, because they use data from cars driving themselves, or actually sometimes people driving cars, to try to learn from that data, the images, the video footage, of someone driving the car, to try to predict the action that a person should take, like steer the wheel. And that would count as AI. In other cases, I will give you one specific example. I was in France when I was doing my PhD. I was working for this research lab, and a lot of people came by to promote this self-driving car that was going to be in the campus, driving itself. And it was all about AI and blah, blah, blah. So we had to go and try it. When I tried the car, it was really underwhelming because it followed a GPS track that was traced specifically for that campus, and it went back and forth. And the car had sensors that would basically stop the car if there was any object nearby. There was no AI, there was no machine learning. It was very basic, and it was quite underwhelming. And then I saw in the news that a lot of people were saying that now there are actual self-driving cars in Europe. And then I saw they referred to this specific prototype that was very, very underwhelming, if you want. So yeah, there's a lot of hype out there.
There's definitely stretching the boundaries of what AI is.
Quite a lot, yeah.
So in 2017, Elon Musk caused a stir when he suggested that AI could trigger World War III, and even said that AI was a bigger danger to humanity than North Korea. In 2019, Bill Gates said that sophisticated AI is as dangerous as nuclear weapons. But then, of course, Elon Musk gave millions of dollars to OpenAI. Depending on the reports, it's anywhere from about 15 million to upwards of 100 million. And Microsoft has invested $10 billion to date, and we're in 2023. So if ChatGPT and AI was so scary, why are they first pumping so much money in the case of Bill Gates, billions? Are they pumping it up and hyping it up for their own stock?
That's a very good question. Very good question. The most cynical take is to realize that a lot of people in the tech sector, they make money from selling stock of companies that have never generated a profit. What they do is they sell the promise that one day will be really big, you know? A lot of people have made a lot of money from Uber shares. There are VCs that have made a lot of money from Uber, but Uber has never really made a profit, at least not for a whole year. So, because that's how you also get not just your stock going up, but you get attention from other investors. Other people then join in and want to put more money into it. So I think there is a little bit of that. And at the same time, maybe they're generally concerned that AI could go rogue, but at the same time, they want to participate in developing a more sophisticated AI, but then pulling the plug when the time comes. Maybe they truly believe that it could go crazy, but they want to be in control of that instead of being the people watching from far away.
Yeah, when I asked ChatGPT that same question, it said that they want to control it.
Potentially. Yeah, I think it's a little bit inflated, though, in the sense that a lot of this idea that AI could go crazy if it can improve itself, hypothetically, we could have that discussion. And I think it's valuable to have that discussion of controlling AI. But I think it's completely detached from how current AI works. Elon Musk said that a spam filter could decide to kill people. He said to get rid of people because it was a good way of getting rid of spam. There's one thing he's right about, which is that AI works by learning to optimize a function. But we don't let AI do anything. Right? The actions are coded by us. So why would we let a spam filter take actions that could kill people? The machine would probably not even learn anything useful because there's so many things you could do. Let's say you let a computer do anything, just send an email to anyone as a way of reducing spam, or even launching a rocket and sending it to the moon. Why would that ever help in reducing spam? How would you ever find an action that's valuable? So in reality, we need to constrain the problem. So what we tell the system is, okay, you can find a word, pick a word that is a good indication of the email being spam. So it's very laser focused. So the computer learns, it picks the word by itself, but it's still a very, very narrow thing that we're doing, just letting it pick words. And that's the case with all AI at the moment. So yes, I love this, sci-fi kind of discussion, a philosophical discussion, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. Because current AI just doesn't work that way.
My other thought behind them saying that, and you see Sam Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI, aka ChatGPT, but they want regulation. So it's like you have first mover advantage and then you regulate it so you don't have competitors. So I thought it was a combination of pumping it and then trying to regulate it so they can regulate their competitors out before they even have a chance.
Actually, but I don't know what's going on in those board meetings, but there's a lot of people who are very cynical about this. The other day, someone was pointing out that Sam Altman is walking around with his backpack, a very big, flashy backpack that allegedly has a button to shut down ChatGPT in case it's causing mayhem. It's like a nuclear button like the president has, And a lot of people were complaining about that, saying it's a little bit of kind of feeding into the hype because it makes his company look very relevant.
Yeah, there's definitely some truth to that I could see. So, yeah, Emmanuel, mention your book title again. Smart Until It's Dumb, Why Artificial Intelligence Keeps Making Epic Mistakes and Why the AI Bubble Will Burst. And the reason that I read this title for the third time here is because even though I'm being cynical right now, I was actually, a few weeks ago, I was big onto this AI hype train. I was full on board. After reading this book, he kicked me off the wagon.
I'm sorry.
And the reason is because I use ChatGPT a lot and I use a lot of other AI tools. In your book, I like your point where it's like, people will say, if ChatGPT is this good right now, imagine AI in 10 years. And that's what I was saying, the same thing. But then it's like you look back and say the iPhone. The iPhone came out in 2007. The latest iPhone, I mean, it's not really any different than that iPhone. I mean, if you're looking at the third one to now, and ChatGPT, what is ChatGPT? Is it 4.0 right now?
Yeah.
People think like, wait until ChatGPT 10 comes out.
That's a very good point. And I think a lot of people, they love saying this. They say it's just a matter of time. They said that with self-driving cars, for example. They've been saying that for quite some time now. It's just a matter of time. If it was just a matter of time, it would have been done already. With so much money poured into, there were 200 billion poured into the self-driving car industry, and they didn't really manage to attain their goal. We need to be clear about one thing here, which is a discovery. Sometimes we need a discovery of a new thing to make progress. That's the case with AI. I'm really impressed by ChatGPT. It works very well. Sometimes it hallucinates, which is what I call the epic mistakes in my book. Hallucination will not go away because it's a feature of the system. It combines existing text to produce plausibly looking text. That's the ChatGPT's goal. Hallucination will still happen once in a while. We have this epic mistake and nobody really knows why, or we can't really look into ChatGPT in such fine detail to understand what's going on. So hallucination will not go away unless we discover a new machine learning methodology, something new that will equip AI with this model of the world, with this understanding of even physical actions. You know, what happens if you throw a ball, somehow model the path of the ball, physical laws. At the moment, it's combining text, produced likely text, right? So that doesn't take us there. And nobody really knows how to do that. One day, maybe someone will discover this new methodology, and then it will get better. But the problem with discoveries is that we can't predict when they will happen, by definition. And they happen in random ways. With nuclear fusion power, for example, it's been decades people say nuclear fusion is the future. But nobody has discovered the way to make nuclear fusion work effectively. We don't know when that's going to happen. So that's the case with AI, it's the case with self-driving cars and many other things. You can't predict discoveries. Einstein, he discovered, if you want, the theory of relativity when he was working for a patent office. He was a clerk. He wasn't a researcher. He wasn't in a lab. He published this paper that didn't even cite other papers. Everything was really random, the way this was discovered. And it happens like that. It could be a hobbyist in a garage that will discover the new iteration of AI that will take us there. But yes, we could hit a ceiling, and it's happened with certain things. You mentioned the iPhone. My computer, the one I'm actually looking at right now, I bought it in 2017. Before, you had to buy a new computer every year because they were out of date. Like, they were so much faster. Now I can still do anything I want with this computer, and it's been quite some time since I bought it. So sometimes you do hit a plateau, and it's very hard to know when you're going to get out of there.
In 2014, Stephen Hawking said the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. As you kind of mentioned before, people think we're going to go from ChatGPT to Skynet. We could have Skynet, but it's not the next iteration of ChatGPT. How many steps are between ChatGPT and Skynet?
We need to understand that this was a machine that was trained to produce text that looks believable. And as sub-goals, the machine had to learn other things. Because if you want to generate text to complete the following sentence, how do you say hello in French? Then the machine needs to know how to translate French in order to complete that sentence. That's what it does. So it actually goes quite far in terms of learning to do or perform certain tasks in order to create text that looks good. But that's so far from all those sci-fi scenarios, right? Like Ex Machina, or like, having sentient AI. I don't know. It's so far away, right? And AI is currently very narrow. The AI that generates images is still detached from the one that generates text. Now they're kind of trying to combine them, but they're still quite different. So it feels like every problem needs a specific solution. And even with ChatGPT, it didn't work very well for certain tasks. So they hired people from Kenya, paying them $2 an hour, to create lots of examples for ChatGPT manually, to write down what they wanted ChatGPT to output. And then ChatGPT was fed with this data to fine-tune it, make it even more politically correct sometimes, or more appropriate, but also to improve the output. So there was a lot of manual work to get it to work as well as it works now. So thinking of going from there to like Skynet or like an Ex Machina kind of phenomenon or sci-fi scenario, to me, It's a very, very hypothetical question. It's good to ask, but it's completely detached from current technology.
So what jobs will AI replace in the next decade, Emmanuel? You wrote an article that was also on your website about this topic. And you write, quote, "If you want to future-proof your career, maybe make sure you focus on high-end, excellent work. Make sure your job involves a lot of human tasks like story angles, persuading, researching, architecturing, strategizing, selling, which AI can't do well, and it doesn't seem like it will do anytime soon," end of your quote. Do you have any specific examples of careers to avoid in the future, and what's the timeline?
That's a very good question. So yeah, my point is that there are certain jobs that require this, not at just certain jobs, sometimes the same job can be done in a good enough way or in an excellent way that has this human touch, and I can give you examples of that in a second, but I would be worried if you are the kind of person that just works in the good enough sector. That's the reality. A lot of companies, for example, let's say when they want to write blog articles for their websites that are just to attract clicks, like SEO-driven articles, you don't really care about having a fantastic piece of research in the article. We've seen them, 19 things to do in Paris this summer, parentheses 2023. You've seen those articles, right? They often hire people on Upwork, on Fiverr to just write something. I think those jobs are at risk. If you're the person writing those articles that aren't very good, that don't require any research, that don't require an original angle, they just need to read correctly. So you pack them with keywords about Paris so that then people go to the website and buy tickets or buy trips, right? Because that's what you use them for. I would be worried. And I think, those are the professions that, look, there was an article by this economist, this Nobel Prize winner of economics, Paul Krugman. He wrote an article a few days ago on the New York Times as he was saying, current AI is not that great. It's more of a stochastic or statistic combination of existing things. But so are a lot of jobs. Those are the ones that are at risk. And the timeline is very soon. So if your job is to combine pieces of text to write blog articles, I've been hearing a lot about translators, human translators that have been in a little bit of a crisis lately. If you're the kind of translator that works for companies that don't care about a fantastic translation, you're in trouble. One example is reviews, hotel reviews. People don't necessarily care when you go to TripAdvisor. Do you care if it's a perfect translation? No, you just want to know if the hotel is clean. So if there are mistakes there, you're in trouble if that's your job, if you're translating those things. Now, if you're a literary translator, you translate high-end books, then you're safer because publishing houses, they understand the value of your work. You'll have to be very clear about the value of your work and try to work in that segment of the workforce. Photographers, if you sell your stock images online, a lot of people now are just generating them. Again, it's good enough. Very often, the images that are generated are not that great. However, that's sometimes enough for a lot of people. I have a friend who owns an online store and he runs a lot of Facebook ads. And the images for the ads, sometimes the ad runs for like a week or sometimes for a day even. So you don't really need something too fancy. You just need an image. Using AI to generate the image is actually even a lot faster. That's the main advantage compared to hiring someone or even buying stock footage. You don't even have to go to the website and find the image. You just type it in 2 seconds, you have your image. Right? And people don't really care about the quality that much. I would focus on professions that have this human touch that is very hard to replace with AI. Again, salespeople, very high-end kind of writing, if you're a creative. Even software engineers, people say software engineers will be replaced by AI. I don't really think so because most of the time, software engineers work on understanding what the client wants. There's very little of writing code, actually, that goes on when you're a software engineer. So if you find yourself doing that, your job is just writing very simple snippets of code, you're kind of a low-end software engineer. So make sure to become the software engineer that deals with clients, that tries to understand the scope of the work, to prioritize the work, because then you're safe.
What percentage of jobs in the next decade do you think will be impacted? Sam Altman, who wrote articles years ago, I think he said at some point like 75% of jobs would be replaced, and that's why he was a fan of UBI or Universal Basic Income. But of course, he's also quite biased trying to get the shock value and the regulation, whatever else. But what do you think?
A more realistic number could be something like 10%, potentially. That's my impression. I don't think current AI is that powerful to actually do what the job. A lot of people say, oh, AI will replace this job, but they never met a person who does the said job. I can give you an example. I've heard people say AI will replace script writing, but have these people met a screenwriter ever? Do they know what the job entails? Because I don't think AI can do it. And I give you one example, the show Homeland. Every year, the writers met people who used to work for the CIA and did what they call spy camp. They met for a week to brainstorm things that could be in the news that year so that they made the show very relevant. And it worked very well because every season seemed to kind of mimic what was going on. So you see all that work to make the show relevant. And as consumers, we don't know how much work there is behind the scenes. So it's easy to say, screenwriting, just ChatGPT can write a script, but do you realize what it actually entails? So that's why I'm more on the 10% side, okay? But again, that kind of work is the excellent work, making all that effort.
So, Emmanuel, I'm going to give you a hypothetical situation. And the only reason it's hypothetical is because I think maybe you're a little bit too young to have kids that are college age. But hypothetically, if you had a child that was going off to school next year, planning what major, would you direct them towards certain majors? Would you direct them towards trade school and maybe having a job that's a little bit more manual and physical? What recommendations would you give them based on your knowledge of AI?
I would tell my child, do whatever you love. But yeah, a profession that helps build stuff, build products. And these can be digital products. But when I say to build products, I talk about the intersection between technology and business. A lot of people miss one of those ends. So there's people who are all about technology. They know all the technical part and sometimes very deeply, but they don't know how to run a business or how to launch a business. And then there's a lot of business people that are all about the business and don't know much of the technical. And being a little bit in between gives you the possibility to build a new product and get that product in front of clients. And I think there's a lot of stuff out there that is done currently in a very, very inefficient way. And it's surprising. I've been having chats with people who work in aviation or logistics, and you wouldn't believe how much is done on Excel or even on paper. So I spoke with people here in the UK. There's Gatwick Airport is the second most important airport in the UK. And until maybe a year ago, they didn't have a way to track vehicles around the airport except for planes. Obviously, planes, you can always know what they are because it's the important thing in the airport. But then everything else, like fire trucks or luggage vehicles, they didn't know what they were in the airport. And sometimes people would leave them in the wrong place, blocking the road, causing chaos. So this company, they built a very simple product, which is a sort of GPS tracker to put on every single vehicle and a dashboard where people can see in the control room of the airport where things are, and a system to set up alarms that go off if someone leaves something in the wrong place or they leave it where it shouldn't be for a certain amount of time. And this fixed a very obvious problem. There's so much like that at the moment. And we're speaking so much of AI and robots going rogue and people losing their jobs. But then you see that so much stuff is still very, very inefficient, especially in old industries like those ones. Sometimes I just call them boring industries, that I really like boring industries. But the reason for it is there's so much to do. So if I had a child and I wanted to advise to them what career path you should join, from whatever angle you want it to be, it would be a good idea if it helps build new products to support these industries in the intersection of business technology, because I think there's so much to do. And you have this wave of investment from venture capital, sometimes from the government, that goes toward all those crazy, NFT, blockchain, AI, metaverse goggles. But then you have this situation at the airport where they can't know where a fire truck is. right? And it's a pity that so much talent is going toward those. And the advice I would give to my child in that situation also comes from the fact that I don't know how long that craziness is going to last. I think because of higher interest rates, the whole NFT blockchain metaverse thing kind of collapsing, I think a lot of efforts will be diverted toward solving real problems. Maybe that's the future. It's boring, but that's the future.
In your book, Emmanuel, you talked about the bias in researching AI. And it's not just AI. I mean, you could probably pick any field and find it in. How the incentives are aligned don't necessarily align with the best research. Eric Weinstein basically says the same thing with physics. Like, we're never going to truly understand physics until we change what's allowed to be researched. But can you talk specifically about how AI research is a little bit overly optimistic?
Yeah. So I think obviously a lot of these things happen in research in general. People are a bit disappointing at the field and how it works. And a lot of that applies to research in AI for sure. I think specifically to AI, one of the problems of the past few years has been that the whole community organized around the idea that every new discovery, let's say every new method proposed, needs to beat every previous method. So you need a metric to show in your scientific paper at the end of the paper where you prove how it beats everyone else. And it's become such a big problem that that's expected, let's say, from every single article. That has degraded research a lot because now people, what they want is to find a metric that supports that, right? And it's not really done in a very, if you want, in a very honest way. There's a lot of cherry picking of the metric, a lot of cherry picking of the methods you compare yours against, a lot of cherry picking of the data you use to support your conclusion. I've seen that a little bit too much, and that's what pushed me away from research. That's one of the reasons I decided not to stay in research after my PhD. I thought, I've become a salesman. People are selling snake oil here. They're just choosing the experiments to support their assumptions or their hypothesis. And yes, that's happening a lot with machine learning specifically. And I've been a reviewer for journals. So they invite me to be in the panel that judges, if you want, the article. And at one point, if I'm honest, I started almost skipping the last bit of the paper because I knew what it was going to say. I knew they would say, we are the best. We beat everyone else. Look at the numbers. You have this table, always have this table with the numbers, the metric of your method against other methods. And they use boldface to indicate the best metric, best method. And it's always the author's method. So it's like, I know what I'm going to see. I try to focus when reviewing the papers on the merits of the methodology. Because the reality is that current AI is very narrow, focuses on solving a specific problem. And sometimes a method works better for a specific kind of data, for a specific kind of problem. And it's good to acknowledge that there's no universal AI that works well everywhere. But that's degraded a lot the work in AI, the focus on metrics, numbers, being the best, always being the best.
I saw recently that they were talking about AI girlfriends. Do you think that's actually going to be a thing?
It's very hard to know what people like in terms of interacting with computers. One example of that is augmented reality. For many years, they've been telling us that there's a new fancy goggle that everyone will want. But it appears that people actually don't want to walk around with goggles, for augmented reality. That's what happened with the metaverse. And now I see those ads on Instagram where Meta is trying to show how the metaverse is useful. So I see this ad of firefighters using these goggles and something saying, Meta themselves, they say firefighters find the metaverse useful, or they're doing their job thanks to, they're trying to prove that someone wants this. So I don't think it's that easy. The market sometimes reacts in weird ways. So the question about will people want AI girlfriends? I don't know. We will have to see. But there's one thing that I would like to point out about this, because someone asked me a question about art generated by AI. What if AI can create paintings or create works of art? And my answer to this person was, look, for quite a while, people haven't actually consumed art because of the difficulty of producing the product. If you see contemporary art, people say, I could have done that. There's like a piece of string that they display in the museum, and you're like, I could have put that there. People don't buy the product, but they buy the story behind the product. You go to just any contemporary art museum, you'll see like most of the things on display, you could have done it. The piece like here in London in the Tate Modern Museum, you have this tower of radios. It's like old radio transmitters, all like, I could do that. But why is that on display? And why do even rich people purchase things like that for so much money that anyone could do? Because they don't buy the product, right? They buy the story behind. And I think with an AI girlfriend, a little bit of the same thing could happen. You know, why do people get a girlfriend? It's not just about the product, if you want. The human component and the story matters to people. And I think some people are quite naive when they think humans care so much about the art product or the conversation they have with this AI girlfriend. Maybe there's another human side that they want. They want the story behind the girlfriend. Hopefully. Do you want an AI girlfriend?
I guess you can shut it off when you're sick of it. So I don't know. There's some advantages I could see, but overall, I would think maybe that's not in my cards, but who knows? Maybe 30, 40 years down the road.
Yeah, it's a good philosophical question, though. Like in the movie Ex Machina, it's an interesting thought experiment if you want, but it's, I don't think we're going to be seeing any of that anytime soon.
Right now, what are you most excited about in terms of the AI field? What are people not necessarily talking about where you're like, yeah, AI actually here? You mentioned digital art, but what else do you really see it disrupting?
It's a very good question. I'm actually quite excited about automating boring stuff. I know that may not sound very exciting. Sometimes it could be a blessing in disguise that AI can do certain jobs for us because we stop doing repetitive stuff and we can free up our creativity to do something else. Certain jobs have a lot of repetitive stuff, collating Excel spreadsheets every week from different sources and putting them together manually. It's exciting if we can get rid of some of this repetitive work. Another exciting thing I saw of ChatGPT the other day, again, it can't really do certain things for you, especially when it involves really high-level work. But it can help you consider things that you didn't consider when you're brainstorming. So being able to use it for brainstorming is actually quite exciting. One example, I asked ChatGPT, what if trees were sentient? It was an example someone gave me. And also I asked, what if a teacup was sentient? What would be the implications? And there was a list of implications, and some of them, maybe I wouldn't have considered them if I was analyzing the situation. But it came up with the legal point of view. Can we just cut a tree if it's sentient? Can we do that? Then there was even say commercial implications. Can you sell trees considering that now they have feelings? Then there was the communication. Could we communicate with trees? So there were like maybe 5 or 6 points. I would have probably come up with those points myself at some point. But I felt like, you know what? I think there were 3 of them that they wouldn't have occurred to me right away. So in a way, it enabled me to think of other things or other thoughts, other points faster. That was pretty cool. As it went as a companion, being able to brainstorm stuff. That's pretty cool, isn't it?
Going back to the jobs, if you're at the lower, say, not elite at your job, just one of the average employees, I feel like those average employees will be gone. And the employees that are really good will just be way more efficient. So instead of having, say, 100 people in a department, maybe you have 60 or 70, because those 60 or 70 people will just be so much more efficient. And I look at it as myself, between all the AI tools that I use, it's probably the equivalent of having 2 assistants. Even just doing video editing and things like that. And it's nothing high level, but it's certainly like entry-level jobs. But then you get into, if you never get that entry-level job, you never are going to get a higher level job because you got to start somewhere. You got to get the required skills to move up. You're not going to graduate from college and be upper management because you don't have the skills. And if you are upper management, you're going to suck at it, like if there's some type of nepotism involved, but you're going to be awful because you never built up those skills. Now I wonder if people, and now like if you're in college and you're using ChatGPT for papers, once you get to the real world, there's a lot of things that you're not going to be able to use ChatGPT. Like you're saying, you can't be a screenwriter and using it. You can't do comedy. There's a lot of things that if you research, it just gives you the corporate narrative. If you want to do anything with the climate, it's only going to give you the UN's view. It's not going to give you any opposing view. And if you try to even prompt it to give you that, it won't even allow you to prompt it.
I've heard this a lot lately. How are people going to learn the skills if the entry-level job doesn't exist anymore because it's done by ChatGPT? So it's a good point. I think there's, look, the point of it comes down again to this excellent work versus good enough. A lot of the people that say ChatGPT will do the job and stuff, it may happen, but it's what you call maybe this low-end kind of work or the average employee. There was this LinkedIn influencer a few days ago who was speaking about management consulting because some people are saying it's going to replace management consultants. I was very skeptical at first because I thought, is the work of a management consultant so easy or repetitive? Is it just mashing up things that exist that it can be replaced with AI? And this guy said there are two kinds of management consultants. Some of them are creating these formulaic PowerPoint presentations that just combine obvious stuff. They don't add a lot of value. Companies keep hiring them, but they're not adding too much value. And then there's the management consultant that really gives you new insights, new ways of seeing things. And those are the ones that are safer in the world of AI. But he also says maybe it's good riddance of the other ones. It sounds terrible, because people might lose their jobs, but maybe it's actually good for society that people are not doing that much the jobs that are just combining existing things, because then we can focus on new things or doing new stuff. So I think that could happen. And I hear a lot lately, people just love even to show me examples of how good AI is at certain jobs. And I think there's a lot of the average work in the examples. And it's hard to have a conversation about this because people get a little bit religious when it comes to AI. So if I tell them, I can't really get AI to do an excellent job here to produce totally novel content, they tell me, you're just not prompting it well. You need to prompt it better, But then when I ask them, okay, show me how I can prompt it, they just don't say anything. They just don't reply. So I think there's a lot of that. And I can give you one concrete example of my own experience. I'm not a creative guy. I'm a techie guy. But because I wrote this book, I had to engage in a lot of creative work. And there were so many instances that what added value to my book was the kind of thing that AI can't absolutely do at all. And that's what added most value. And it's not that I want to be just talking about my book. It's a bit self-referential, but it's a good example if you want from my experience. The title of my book, it's called Smart Until It's Dumb. And you said it before. It was like, it's here. Ta-da. It's like, why artificial intelligence keeps making epic mistakes and why the AI bubble will burst. I'll tell you a story of the title. My version of the title my original title was The AI Hype. It was really bland. And I actually used ChatGPT to come up with other titles. And they were all equally bland, but there were different variations of this. They were the AI craze, AI extravaganza, the AI fantasy, all in that direction. And the designer of the book told me, no, I'm going to come up with a title that actually represents your message, what you're trying to say. And he came up with this title. I don't think that work could have been done by AI. And I think the title made a big difference to the book because a lot of people felt it was a good hook. Even the cover of the book, the concept for the cover is a kind of AI robot that has a clown nose. That represents what my book is saying in an image. You can tell that it's a book about AI or technology because this sort of robot is on every AI book. And then the clown nose is how we convey the message that it can be a little bit silly sometimes. I don't think AI could have come up with this idea. It's really novel and generally comes up with formulaic things or things that repeat the past. And sometimes that's fine. But I wanted a really outstanding cover for the book. So this designer did a really, really good job. And that's why he's an outstanding designer that will not be replaced by AI. And people will keep recommending his work. That's just one of the examples. Even look, the way I wrote the book initially, the first draft, the angle it didn't resonate with the audience very well. So I sent copies of the draft to beta readers, people who I thought were part of my audience, and to collect feedback. And a lot of them told me, look, this chapter is really whiny and negative. Please don't be that negative. Tell me something good. Or they told me, look, everybody knows this story. I don't learn anything from this. However, this other story You mentioned this, but I would like to know more because it's not that well known. So finding what to say was what made writing difficult. Then putting the words together, which is what ChatGPT can do, that's the easiest part, right? I think a lot of people manage to write very good text now, people who don't speak very good English, for example, because they use ChatGPT, and that's great. But choosing what to say is what makes a book a good book. It's not grammar.
Yeah, I think it goes back to your example you brought up earlier today when you talked about the translation, right? Where for certain things, it doesn't have to be 100% accurate. It's good enough's good enough. If you're talking about like, hey, you have some murder trial and you need to translate, you don't want ChatGPT potentially taking out witnesses and translating it completely. So for that, I mean, you obviously, but like you mentioned before, if you're a corporation, oftentimes your motive is more profit. If it's good enough, it's like going to all these stores where they have the self-checkout. Hell, some people probably like the self-checkout because it's faster. But for me personally, I generally don't like the self-checkout, but I'll go to it if I have to wait in line. So it's a worse customer experience for me. But then I also wonder on the accounting standpoint, if you're hypothetically Walmart and you have this self-checkout machine, that machine is now an asset, and then you can write it off as it depreciates every year. You don't have to hire as many employees, which is basically a liability. They might not show up to work. You have to pay payroll taxes for them and things like that. So in terms of your bottom line, it's actually better to have an expensive machine on the books than it is to have employees. And then I wonder if other companies, as more machines are built, would rather just take the machine just due to flat out accounting, not even performance at a point.
I know. I think, companies are always trying to optimize, and they try to see where they can optimize. And I think that will happen. And sometimes, again, optimization, sometimes, yes, it may not work as good for the client. Or you may even not make that much money. When I used to work for Expedia and in the revenue optimization department, we used AI, actually, machine learning, to learn from data to see how to price certain deals, like hotel rooms and stuff. And sometimes the business constraint was, okay, we want to promote a certain area, a certain location. We want to grow there. So we don't want to make the most money. We're okay with actually not making as much as we can, but we want to grow, right? So businesses are constantly doing that. And I can imagine that sometimes for a business, good enough, like in that case, actually, I don't want to make the most money. Good enough is going to be the goal. And it will happen with translation. In certain cases, I don't care if the translation has mistakes because nobody cares about that. Or SEO articles, right? All these articles to drive traffic into your website. I don't care. I just want traffic. If it's not a fantastic piece of, investigative journalism, that's fine. So yeah, good enough is going to, and I think that's why certain employees need to be very careful, because if they feel like they're in a business that clients will just not care about high-end work, then you need to be worried, because that will happen, I think there may be a rebound, though. I think some companies may believe that AI can do a better job than it can actually do. So they will replace people, and then at one point they will see that it's not working that well because the mistakes AI make and stuff, it's actually more annoying than they initially thought. So they may end up going back a little bit to the human. I think that may happen.
Yeah, as a PhD in machine learning, as an AI consultant for over a decade, what are your biggest fears of AI going forward?
So I think my biggest fear for a while has been people overestimating the intelligence of AI, and deploy it in unsafe contexts. For example, deploy it to drive cars around a city. Or there's a consultant in aviation safety that has been telling me that he's a bit worried because there's a lot of pressure to use AI somehow in aviation now because they don't want to feel that they're lagging behind. But it's a field where people used to be very, very careful with any software they used. So we don't want to use software that hallucinates, like ChatGPT in that context. But what scares me the most is believing that it works better than it does. You know that ChatGPT can generate program code. So I'm scared that people will just run that code, will execute the code, believing that it's safe, believing that it does what it's intended to do. Because it actually does make mistakes. sometimes pretty bad mistakes. I've seen it. And some people say that it's even getting a bit worse lately, that the GPT-4 isn't actually in some cases worse than ChatGPT. That's what I'm most afraid of.
What about the surveillance side of things? You have China, the CCP, which uses a combination of cameras and their social credit score, and they're not really using it for anything positive. And then I saw a video where I think it was a coffee shop where they had the AI in the coffee shop, and it was seeing how many coffee cups the baristas poured per hour, and then it tied it to how long their customers were in the store. So if you didn't pour many cups of coffees or your customers just left, then you got a bad score. So are we going to see people whose job performance is based on some computer algorithm, or are we going to have social credit scores? You have the techno-utopian view or the techno-dystopia, so that's more of a dystopian view, but in some respects there's some reality to it because it's already being implemented at this coffee shop or in China.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, some people are already concerned. There's a new feature that Google provides that lets you let their AI assistant go through your emails to find stuff. They don't use the emails to train the AI system, so it's really not that scary, but people already sense this dystopian future happening. The question of this privacy and this dystopian future is separate from AI in reality, because these cameras could be used without any AI and people could be surveilled if you want. But the fact that AI can do that job so efficiently, like counting the cups, may encourage a lot of people to use AI more, right? For those, to use cameras, let's say, more than they did. So I think, that could happen. I don't know. I think there's a question of a regulation here that will, be discussed a lot in the future. In Europe, there was this GDPR regulation for data that was very, very stringent in certain ways. Now they're speaking of AI regulation. A lot of it is quite concerning because some of the things they want to do, I don't think if they're very enforceable. They say we want to be able to know when it's AI that generated some data, right? We can maybe trust reputable companies to actually tell us. But a lot of the current AI technology can be built by anyone. We know how it works, not to the finest detail, but we know a lot. So it's not like it's a secret. So there could be other companies that will not comply to that. They will use some AI without telling you, and they can even build their own AI. So I don't know how much we'll be able to tell AI from not AI generated content. There will be a lot of discussion around that. There was an image that popped up on Google Images at the very top of the search results that was generated by AI already, and Google removed it. But they won't be able to remove every image that people report that is generated by AI. There will be quite a lot of changes, and I'm hoping we don't become this dystopian society, but we'll have to be careful, right, about that. Because
with all the censorship right now, I thought it was interesting in your book where you talked about the hate speech, and you had some of the studies where, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit, but they couldn't even define hate speech, really didn't even know what the criteria was, yet you could be having all your posts or accounts taken down. And of course, you see that now with YouTube or TikTok, where it's like, oh, you violated the community guidelines. Oh, what's the guideline I violated? Oh, just community guideline, like, they don't even know.
Because we need to understand that machine learning learns from examples of how to do the job. A lot of people choose not to mention this when they speak about AI, but it learns from examples of how to do the job. In the case of that hate speech study, you have to show to the computer, this is hate speech, this is not hate speech. And the computer tries to learn patterns to detect hate speech. But someone in the first place needs to determine what hate speech is, right? And they did it in a very muddled up way in that study that was very questionable. And with ChatGPT, again, they are manually telling ChatGPT what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And that's why now, if you tell me a joke about a woman, the ChatGPT will just tell you it's inappropriate. I don't make jokes about certain genders. There were cases in the past, tell me a joke about women and it would not say, but then tell me jokes about men and it would make the joke. But that's all been manually fine-tuned. They have people, again, in Kenya. Sometimes what they do is they generate multiple outputs from ChatGPT and they ask them to rank the outputs and then feed that information back to ChatGPT so they can fine-tune the system. But there is a person somewhere making that decision. What's hate speech, what's appropriate. And again, in the hate speech study, because there's so much data, these machines, they need a lot of data. Machine learning is very data hungry. So it's kind of difficult to generate that many examples of hate speech. So what they did is they collected lots of tweets, and then they hired people on one of those platforms like Fiverr or Upwork, somewhere else, to just label them as hate speech or not. And the process was really sloppy in general. So they didn't do a very good job. So yeah, that raises a lot of questions.
Emmanuel, one of the biggest takeaway messages from your book that I got was that I don't think AI or machine learning, whatever terminology we want to use, is nowhere near as advanced as we think it is. And the media, when Elon Musk and Bill Gates and these other, Mark Zuckerberg, talk about how we need regulation, we're going to create World War III, really builds you up to think we're really close to some type of a robot or iRobot or one of these movies. And I read a quote that described ChatGPT as a bullshitter on steroids, but it reminded me of one of your articles that you wrote called Amazon's Cashierless Stores, Artificial Intelligence or Major Deception. And you mentioned about how they have these centers basically in India and Costa Rica. And then you're also mentioning Kenya now. You mentioned the example of Amazon Fresh, where you go into a store and you just walk out the store and it automatically charges you for things you never even interact with the cashier. I lived in Costa Rica for a while. I went to a Spanish immersion school, and I have a friend that worked at Amazon. So I contacted her before we started, and I was like, hey, what were you doing? Because I knew she was doing something with AI. And she was basically like, yeah, I watched cameras all day and just to make sure the machine was in the right location. And then she's like, there was actually several of us that were watching the same machine, so they wanted to verify with numerous people. Like you mentioned in that Amazon Fresh example, where you walk out of the store and then maybe you get a receipt like a day later. If it was actual AI, that receipt should be pretty close, maybe not instantaneously, but it should be within a few minutes. Why are you giving a receipt a day later? Or is someone in Costa Rica or India or Kenya actually looking at cameras? And the answer to the question is probably, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's been leaked, so that's known. The first time I went to Amazon Fresh, I was quite surprised because what they promise is that you just grab your stuff and you just walk away, and then it will just send you an invoice. It knows who you are because you log in when you walk into the store. But then the cameras, which are all over the ceiling, will just detect what you bought. I had two concerns about that. So my first concern was commercial. I thought, does this actually make business sense? Because a lot of people, they just try to use AI everywhere just because they think they're going to make money from it. But I was thinking, there are still employees in the store replenishing the shelves. There's a security guard at the entrance. Here in London, most supermarkets already don't have a lot of staff because they use self-checkouts anyway. What's the gain from this? And it seems they've made that mistake because they opened some shops in London in areas where people didn't really care about the shop. They care about buying the cheapest goods. So they kept going to the cheapest supermarkets. They were like, I don't care if I have to go to self-checkout or the AI camera can send me the invoice. So that was my first concern. But the second concern is that immediately when I heard what the promise was, I thought, this is like self-driving cars. This can't be done at the moment. And I was like, I think I'm going to be proven wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. But my first instinct was, for the same reason that self-driving cars can't really be built at the moment, that couldn't be built. And it was the edge cases. What if I walked into the shop for the first time with a friend? What if I tell my friend to hold my stuff for a second? Then while my friend's holding something, then they grab another thing for themselves, and then we just switch hands. And those are all these edge cases and situations that as humans we understand, but then what will the machine do? I thought this is very, very difficult as a problem because of all the edge cases. Not everyone's going to go and just grab something cleanly, put it in the bag in a way that it's 100% clear who bought what. And when I walk out of the store, I get this notification saying, we are preparing your invoice. It will be there with you soon. And I'm like, okay, this is suspicious. Maybe I'm right. Maybe they actually didn't manage to make it work. And I think that's what happened. They thought that AI was more powerful than it could be. So they launched this program in the company. And at the end of the day, they realized There are so many situations that it just doesn't cope with. And then you get your receipt like 3 hours later, 5 hours later. Some people have reported it took a whole day. And I think people are actually watching the video, or at least confirming that what AI outputted was. And then I found this article that someone had apparently leaked that this was the case, and people were in Costa Rica and India watching the videos. And I felt this was something I would have predicted. I would have known this would happen. I said that with self-driving cars when they became so trendy, like in 2017. I was telling people, I don't want to work for a company that wants to build a fully self-driving car that can drive itself anywhere, because it's not going to work because of the edge cases. And that's what happened. Cars getting confused at a traffic cone in an awkward position or at strange situations. And that's what happened with Amazon.
What's the motivation for Amazon in that case? Because no one looks at Amazon as an AI company anyways. Is that a way to get more people into a store? I just don't understand the motivation.
I still don't understand the commercial outlet for that, but I can tell you what I heard of why they did this, which is the major cause of or failed AI projects, which is putting the cart before the horse. It's like, we want to use AI because it's cool, or we have this technology, we want to push it somewhere. And instead of thinking of what customers want, what people really want. I think what happened is that they implemented a technology for their own warehouses, not for supermarkets, that relied on cameras and I think even weight sensors in the warehouse to be able to detect what people were grabbing from the shelves. And someone came up with the idea, what if we create a supermarket that uses this technology? So again, it was cart before horse. It was now, what do people want in supermarkets, right? What do people need? They thought, wow, we have this technology. What if we build this on steroids with AI? They decided to remove the weight sensors and stuff. Let's just use cameras and just try to create a supermarket without thinking whether there was a business case for it. And I think also the tendency to have a lot of free money or easy money over the past few years has contributed to this. People just build stuff to try if it works. They just do it and then they see. And I think that's what happened here.
Emmanuel, what was the reception of your book so far? At least in reading some of your blogs and in your book, that a lot of people kind of look at you as a Luddite was the reaction I got, even though you have a PhD in software and you're a software engineer. And if that's the case, why do people have to be so bullish on it? There's a reality to things. If you just admit like, hey, maybe it's not that good, that doesn't make you a Luddite. It just means that you're living in reality.
I know. Look, I was looking for a publisher for my book, and I was having conversations with agents, with publishers, and this agent told me, first of all, he said, nobody cares about AI, that it won't sell. And that was before the ChatGPT boom. So, he was proven wrong. It was very far off. But then he said, if your book made a prediction of the end of the world, then people may want to buy it. That's what people buy. You need to either be highly positive or highly negative. You need to tell us that it's going to change our lives for the better or for the worse. But your book is kind of in the middle, saying, hey, it's actually not that good, and a bit balanced point. I kind of tried to see if I could alter my message to make it a bit more kind of sensationalist. I gave up in the end. And I thought I will self-publish my book, which is what I did, which was a lot of work. Because I don't want to alter the message that much, but I think there's a lot of that. The whole industry is organized and making a big fuss of things because that's how you get investment, that's how you get attention. And so that's what people do. Even universities, sometimes they issue these press releases like the Turing test has been passed in this competition, and it didn't. It was a very, very basic experiment. It didn't really happen, but maybe it's being a salesman, and there's a lot of that, promoting a field to make it sound very cool and then get a lot of attention and then get money potentially for investment. And yeah, I'm not a Luddite. I love technology and we need more technology. And I gave examples about the airport that is operating so inefficiently. And I think they need technology to make this operate better. There was a person telling me the other day, how can there be queues or lines at airports in security when AI is supposed to be so wonderful? Why is there a guy looking at the screen and then there's a queue? There's probably lots of opportunities to use technology to make our lives easier. The whole hyping up thing hurts people a lot. And it's hurt me, and it's hurt a lot of people I know, because we end up working on projects that don't make any sense, that are launched because of the hype. So we end up in this project where someone promised something impossible to do, and they promise it so badly that now we kind of need to build it or build something, but we know it's not going to work. And people get depressed. And then there's a lot of idleness. People end up not working because they know it's kind of broken. But then to keep the appearance of being relevant and building something great, they keep hiring more people for a team that is already not building anything. And a lot of people are miserable in the tech field, more than you can imagine, because of all this. So yeah, I'm hopeful that people will become more moderate, because we will be able to tackle real problems that people have, that companies have, that industries have. I spoke with this guy who worked with satellites, actually. He working for companies that launch commercial satellites. And he saw that there were lots of issues because they planned all the ground logistics by using Excel spreadsheets that they sent by email, and they got lost, and people work on different versions of the spreadsheets. And sometimes they were about to, the rocket was on the launch pad, and they realized, oh, we're missing this other thing that we need because it wasn't delivered on time, because there was a mess caused by using the wrong Excel spreadsheet. And the guy built a startup, if you will, his own business to solve this problem. He's digitized the logistics of ground operations before launching a satellite. It's quite fascinating. A lot of people would say that's not a VC backable business. It's not going to be the new Twitter. But who cares? The guy's already making money, and he's never had any investment in the business because he solved the real problem that people had. So his clients paid for the solution right away. He had a line of people waiting to buy his solution because it solved the real problem. And now he's making good money with a very small business that's solving a real problem. So I'm hoping there will be a lot more of that, instead of people just pretending to use NFTs for metaverse, blah, 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 but then just not do anything real.
Yeah, the NFT craze was unbelievable that people got sucked into that. Smart people do stupid things, or can believe stupid things. Dr. Emmanuel Maggiori, the author of Smart Until It's Dumb, Why Artificial Intelligence Keeps Making Epic Mistakes and Why the AI Bubble Will Burst. Where can people buy your book, get a hold of you, go to your blog?
Well, they can buy my book anywhere. Your favorite retailer, it's on Amazon, but you can also go to Barnes & Noble or Waterstones here in the UK and get a copy there. If it's not in stock in the physical shop, you can ask for a copy. So yeah, pretty much anywhere. And you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I like to interact with people on LinkedIn. And I also have my blog where I'm looking to write more in the future. And there's another book in the works at the moment, so we'll see how that goes.
And what book are you currently working on right now?
Well, I'm shaping the topic, but it will have to do with this epidemic of non-work. So much idleness and so much money going to projects in technology that nobody cares about, or building products that are doomed to fail, but people are still building them. And why did this happen? How can so many people be paid so much to do so little? You asked me about that before in the beginning of this podcast. What are the causes for this? And I've been doing some research. I've been speaking with investors. What happened with tech? Why did it go crazy and extravagant over the 2010s, actually, and into the 2020s? What happened? Why did all these people get fired then? When 2021, 2022, there was like the downfall of tech. So what happened? That's my next book.
Be interesting. Yeah, hopefully you can join us once that's published and we can talk about that. So Emmanuel, what's a final thought that you want to leave us with?
There is so much boring stuff to do in this world that needs to be done. And we should be tackling those things instead of falling for all the AI girlfriend, NFT, augmented reality goggle kind of thing. I'm hoping we can all fall in love with those really boring problems that end up not being boring at all, because you end up building something that people actually need and use. So that's my final thought.
If you were an investor, what would you focus on investing in? Because I think you're right. A lot of the actual real use cases will be these quote unquote boring businesses versus these sexy things, aka the artificial girlfriend. If that turns out to be sexy or not, that's to be determined. But what would be some like applicable things that an investor would be?
Yeah, so I think investors should be looking into businesses that solve real problems in a niche where let's say the founder knows the domain very well, and they saw that something's done in a very inefficient way because they really know the field deep enough to see the things that nobody can see, right? From the outside, you don't know how this works. Like, I don't know how satellites are launched, but people who really know the field, they can see what's missing. So I would invest in businesses that were like that because you can make money right away. Investors don't like this because it's small. They focus on things that can really grow very big, but the strategy is not working. So if we look overall, the performance of venture capital, it's actually not working better than investing in the stock market. That's the reality that a lot of people don't want to admit, and there's not a lot of evidence about anything because people don't like to study those things, but there's one very good study where they tracked investment in lots of different VC funds, and they saw it's just actually not working. This idea of going for miraculous new Facebook or Uber, because it doesn't happen that often to compensate all the losses in reality. So it's just not working. So if I were an investor, I would focus on more proven businesses. You know what? They're smaller, but they succeed a lot more. I've seen lots of people launch these kind of businesses where we knew they would succeed. There were people waiting for the product. They were just signing up before it was launched to pay for it, And those are the businesses they should focus on. And another thing is that a lot of investors have forgotten about what is called a moat sometimes, or a competitive advantage, which is what protects your business from competition. Focus a lot on helping a business grow really fast. But there's no point in growing fast if your market share will be eroded in the future. There are only very few circumstances where you can build that moat around your business. One of them is network effects, right? When the people appreciate your business because there are lots of people in it, like social networks. So that's a typical example. But there are cases like WeWork where there was no moat. WeWork was a real estate business. There was no moat. There was nothing protecting it. So the investors subsidized the growth of WeWork. They subsidized the business so that it could charge a low fee or whatever you call it for using these offices. They undercut competitors, but it was all subsidized. They were doing that at a loss. But what happens when you pull the plug on all that external subsidy of growth? Then you end up having offices that are just like any other co-working space. People can still go to another one. I've seen in London, there are so many different brands of WeWork-like co-working spaces. They also have coffee and beer taps and stuff. Like, there wasn't an advantage to WeWork, but they forgot about that. They just wanted to grow it big. And I think a lot of investors have adopted the strategy of, let's just grow it and see. If it grows big, there surely will be a way that would be an advantage. And they've done it with WeWork, with Peloton. They just try to grow big and they forget about the moat. They should be thinking about that moat earlier, because there's no point in growing something fast if you're not going to be able to protect your market share. And businesses that are, like I said before, the niche kind of business that, like the rocket launching thing I mentioned, they do have a competitive advantage. It tends to be economies of scale that work because the business is actually small. They target a niche and they can take a big portion of that niche. And the product is not that easy to build, so it kind of deters other people from entering that business, taking a sliver of an already small pie. And because of the difficulty in creating the product, the economies of scale don't work very well when you start. And so those businesses, they tend to work well in time. Once you grow, not so many other businesses are interested in dethroning you. And I think investors should be looking into those businesses.
Yeah, it's great advice. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Emmanuel, for joining us. And I hope we can have you again once you publish your new book.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for having me.
My dear friends, that is it for this episode of El Podcast. Once again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube as well as Rumble. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode.